Oh, hello! Greetings and welcome to this episode of Let's Create Something in After Effects. Today, unlike in the 53 previous episode, we're going to build something using no plugins at all. It's going to be a great occasion to focus on some of the often underrated tools that are natively part of After Effects. Because as powerful, fun to use, and time-saving most plugins are to us as motion design tools, I'm aware that, just like Pokemons, not everyone has had the chance to catch them all. Although most of the time, it's more a question of budget than a question of chance. Especially those of you out there that are just starting out, or who are working in studios that are not necessarily specialized in motion design, but from time to time has to produce some kind of animations without having access to the myriad of standard MoGraph tools that other more specialized studios happen to possess. As we like to do here on the Xponentialdesign channel, we're going to create a seamlessly looping sequence, because loops can be useful due to the fact that it can be a very short sequence that we can extend for an infinite duration on the playback. So for example, instead of rendering 1 hour of video, which would be the equivalent of rendering 108,000 frames, we can get away with only 90 frames and then spend our precious time on more useful activities like spending time with the family, raising our children, or simply skip to other projects and get more work done. So what we're going to build today is a space flight sequence, and we're going to create that in After Effects because setting up a camera on a spaceship to create that kind of shot can become very expensive very fast. And also, since I'm recording this the day after Andrew Kramer has released his fantastic Orb free plugin, it opens up a whole new level of sci-fi shots we can put together for free.
Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here for videocopilot.net, and today I am very pleased to present to you my latest free plugin, Orb, right here on this fantastic channel, Xponentialdesign. Try it out, and we will see you next time.
So let's get inside After Effects and let's get going. So first we're going to create a new composition by going composition, new composition, and let's make it 1920 by 1080, the standard HD composition. 720 frames should be sufficient. Let's hit OK. Next we're going to create a solid, so let's hit Ctrl Y, or we can just go at Layer, New, Solid. And let's make sure it is the same size as our composition by just clicking on this button here, and then let's click OK. Maybe we can call it something like Starfield. And let's add on here, we're going to look at the multiple particle systems that we have that are not third-party plugins but are directly bundled with After Effects. So one of them is called CC Particle World. Let's double click on that while we have the solid selected. Now this brings me back. It's kind of an old effect. Before it was not even bundled in After Effects. It was part of a special collection from Psycore Effects, and Psycore Effects is a company which is located in Uppsala, Sweden. CC Particle World was developed by Jens Enquist, and Peter Norby also worked at Psycore Effects. He's the one who would later on create Trapcode Particular, one of the best particle systems on the market right now, which he ended up selling to Red Giant Software located in Beaverton in the state of Oregon. So that's it for a little bit of history. Now what we get with this is this kind of animation. Let's see what we can do at first. Let's change the orientation of this. So let's get down to physics, and instead of explosive, let's set that to direction axis. Now we want it to face towards us, so let's change the extra angle. Let's type 90 here, so 90 degrees. Now it'll be facing towards us, but it's still going down, so we need to turn off the gravity. So so right here we've got the gravity property here. Let's set it down to 0. Now we've got some kind of a warp effect. Oh yeah, we can just shut down the visual guides here. We've got a couple of them. Let's get rid of them by checking off all these checkboxes here, right there. And can we lose this last extra one? I don't know if we can remove this. All right. So yeah, that's what we've got. Now, instead of having lines like that, we can change the type of particle. So let's get in the particle section here. And instead of line, we want to have something like faded spheres. We have a couple of other choices, but let's choose this one. Now the color is decided from these properties here, birth and death color. So that means it can start a specific color and over his life become the other color. But in our case, let's set them both to white. And let's make them a little bit smaller. So we can just add a 0 right after the dot here. And on both values here, birth and death, they'll get real tiny like that. And we can also change the emitter, so how large we want the area of emission to be, and that's in the producer here. So let's change the radius X. I'm going to stretch it like that, and let's also increase the radius Y like this. Let's make sure that it covers all our area right from the beginning. We can increase the amount of particles by increasing the birth rate property here. And let's increase their duration. So right now they last 1 second. Let's make them last 3 seconds. And we can also maybe push them back on the Z. So let's change the position Z for the producer. Now we want to make a 90 frames loop. So what we're going to do to do that, let's go to frame 90 and let's hit on the stopwatch for the birth rate and let's hit page down. We're going to go to the next frame, 91, and we're going to set this value here to 0. So what that'll mean is that once we get past the 90 frame time point here, they're going to stop emitting. So by the time we get to frame 180, they should all be gone. We can also, let's watch a preview. Now they're going pretty fast. Let's change their velocity. So right here in the physics section, we've got a velocity property. Let's set this down to 0.25. And right there. We have our particle motion. Cool. We can also change the size variation. So right now, by default, it's set to 50%. Let's crank this up to 100%. We'll get a little bit more variation on their scale. Now we're almost ready to make our loop. So right here, we've got our composition here. Let's rename it to Starfield Edit. And we're going to grab this composition here and I'm going to bring it onto this icon here. It's just going to create another composition. Let's change its name to Starfield Loop. And right there, we're going to do a little trick here to make it loop 90 frame. So let's go to frame 90. And right at frame 90 with our layer selected, let's go to Edit. And let's hit on Split Layer. So that'll make another one and cut it right at this point here. So what we need to do is just grab this and bring it all the way up to the beginning of the composition. And if we close our work area by hitting N on frame 89, we'll get a perfect loop. Now, what I recommend you to do to make it easier for later on is to export this sequence as a video. So let's do that. To add it to the render queue, let's hit Control-Shift/, or we can just go composition add to render queue. And we're going to go right beside the output module here. Let's click on the little arrow here. I might have a little bit more choices than you here because I've made some custom export settings, but let's choose lossless with alpha, and that will make sort that instead of having a black background stuck in our video, what's black is going to be transparent. Now we can just click right here and choose where we want to render it out in our computer, and click save, and let's hit the render button. This should not take too long to render because it's just 90 frames, so let's wait on it. And there we go. Now we can just re-import it in our project panel by double-clicking here. And let's select it right here by double-clicking on it. And it has been imported in our project panel. Next, let's work on our other effect. So let's create another new composition by hitting Control N. And let's call this one Fractal Nebula. We're going to make some kind of clouds. And to do that, we're going to use some fractal noise. So first, let's make a new solid. So Control Y. Let's make sure it's the size of the composition. We can call it Fractal Noise. Hit OK. And let's get our effects here from the Effects and Preset panel. Let's type Fractal Noise right here in Noise and Grain. Let's double click on it. And that's what we've got. This is also a very conventional old effect. It has been used for creating visuals in movies as early as 1982 for the movie Star Trek and the Wrath of Khan. So let's see what we can work with that. First, from the fractal type, let's go ahead and choose cloudy right there. And let's get inside the sub settings here. And we can play around with the sub rotation until we get something a little bit more cloud-like, like this. And we can also maybe change a little bit the influence. Let's create an adjustment layer on top of that. So let's hit Control Alt Y, or we can just go Layer, New, Adjustment Layer. And on that layer, we're going to add a Levels effect. So let's type that, Levels. Let's add this. And we're going to just squeeze these like that. So we're going to get some darker areas there. Right there. And let's animate that as if it was going forward towards us. So in order to do that, we can keyframe the scale. So let's open up the transform settings. And on frame 0, let's hit on the stopwatch for the scale. And let's get 90 frames later. So let's hit 90. And we're going to type this, we're going to change this value here to 200. Let's hit U to reveal both our keyframes. And let's hit 0 on the numpad to see what we get for the animation. As I don't know if you can notice, but as you can see, it seems to be slowing down as it gets bigger. So what we're going to need to do to get a more constant speed on that is select both our keyframes here. And let's just, on one of them, right-click and keyframe assistant. And let's select exponential scale. Now, this will create a bunch of keyframes in between, and when we'll play this back now, it'll go forward at a more constant speed. It won't seem to slow down as it is going forward, so that's one step further. And in order to make that loop, what we're going to do is we're going to create another fractal noise. So let's duplicate this one by hitting Control D, or simply by going Edit, Duplicate. And first of all, we're going to just delete all the keyframes there. And instead of starting from 100 to 200, we're going to make this one start from 50 to 100. So oh, I forgot to keyframe them. So that's very important. Let's keyframe them. So we're gonna hit the stopwatch here at frame 0 and make sure that this one is set to 50. And let's go to the end right there at frame 90 and let's hit 100 there. Once again, we're gonna select both keyframes, right click and do the exponential scale. And what's gonna happen now is we're gonna fade this one in. So as this one terminates its motion, when it gets to the end, it's gonna arrive at 100. And since this one starts at 100, it's gonna close the loop. So let's do that. Let's select our second fractal noise here and let's hit T. That's gonna reveal the opacity setting. So let's create a keyframe here by hitting on a stopwatch on frame 0. And let's set that to 0. So what we're gonna see is the layer underneath. And let's get all the way to the end here on frame 90, and for the opacity let's bring it back to a full 100. So let's preview that. So now we're getting something that is going to loop. Let's add a little bit of color to that. So on top of our adjustment layer here, we're gonna add another one. So let's hit Control-Alt-Y. And on this one, let's add another effect. This one is called Colorama. So let's get this Colorama here. This by default is not what we're going to use definitely. Let's open up the output cycle, and from the use preset palette here, we can choose a preset. So let's select something like ramp red. This is going to make it some kind of a red color here. So now it looks a little bit too vivid for the color of some gaseous space clouds. So we're going to need to tone it down a little bit. So once again, we can add another adjustment layer on top of all that. So let's hit Control-Alt-Y. Now we have a third one. We should name them. This is not a good practice here. So this one is the level. Let's call it levels. This one is the colorization. And this one is going to be the toning down. So on the toning down, let's add an effect that's called curve. So let's fetch that from our effects and preset panel. Let's double click on it. And we can simply bring this here a little bit down there until we get something that's a little bit more, a little less bright. So now we're back to something that's a little bit darker, but it doesn't look as ethereal as we would want it to be for, let's say, gas clouds in space. So first, what we can do is add another adjustment layer on top of that. So let's hit Control-Alt-Y once again, and we're gonna add one that's called vector blur. So let's type that in here. It says CC vector blur. So that means it's also an effect that was initially from Psycore effects in Uppsala. And let's crank this up a little bit. So now you can see that it becomes a little bit more like some gas, like some tendrils here, and we're starting to lose them a little bit. So maybe we can go back in the levels here and get back some of the areas that are being darkened to get back a little of our details here. And let's add a little bit of glow on that. So this one is the vector blur. Let's add a fifth adjustment layer. So Control-Alt-Y once again. We can add as many as we want. And on this one, we're going to add some glows. So let's get our glows from the effects and preset panel. Let's type glow. And let's add a first one. What I like to do is to combine different glows. So let's for this first one, let's let's get the threshold down to 1%. It's going to make it very, very bright. And let's get the glow radius also to 1, very, very small. And the glow intensity, let's put this very, very low value. So something like 0.006. Now, there's not much difference, but it's going to help for our second glow. So let's duplicate this glow here. So let's hit with the effect selected here. Let's hit Control D, or simply with the effect selected, let's go duplicate. And now we have another one. So this one we can increase its radius here, something like 30. We can increase also the threshold and increase its intensity. So now we're going to get a little bit more glowing on there. And we can maybe add a third one. So let's duplicate our second one and let's make this one real bigger. And maybe increase the threshold a little bit, the intensity. So we're trying to get a little bit of spill around our nebulas there. Let's call this glow. And on top of all that, we can add something that will add a little bit of turbulence on all of that. So let's add a sixth adjustment layer. Once again, Control Alt Y. And on here, we're going to add something that's called turbulent displace. Let's get that applied on this adjustment layer. And this is going to add a little bit, like the name says, it's going to add a little bit of turbulence. We can decrease the amount because that's maybe a little bit too much. And maybe decrease the size as well. So let me just maybe set it down to half. It's going to go faster for the preview. And it's going to make it seem like it moves around like some gas as it goes forward and as it's getting to loop as we get our loop. So maybe that's a little bit too much. Once again, turbulence. We can directly tone down the opacity on this to reduce the effect of that if we want, just to get something a little bit less intense. All right, so pretty cool. Now what we can do is once again render that out into a video sequence. So let's add this to the render queue. We don't need the transparency here because we didn't work with transparency, but it doesn't matter in this case if it's all black like that. Let's render this fractal nebula. I'm probably gonna speed this up in the edit because you don't want to wait for this to render. It's gonna take a little while. Alright, so after a little time skip, now it's done rendering. Please don't look at the clock down there because this is not exactly the time it took to render. Actually, let's see. It took 1 minute and 28 seconds. So what we're going to do next is we're going to import this clip that we rendered with our Fractal Nebula. Let's import it in our project panel. And let's start to make our compositing. So we're going to select both our video sequence here, and let's drag both of them on this little icon here, and we're gonna get this panel here. It's gonna ask create a single composition. That's what we want. We don't want to sequence the layer. We want them to appear on top of each other. So let's hit OK, and now we have the Fractal Nebula and our star field loop. Let's bring this on top, or maybe we can leave this one there and use a blending mode like overlay. We'll see what's best for us. So we're starting to get some space traveling motion there, and as we render our loop now, it's not going to calculate all the calculation done by the fractal noise, and neither it's going to calculate all the calculation from the particle systems. Since we've rendered these into videos, it only has to calculate the frames now. So let's see how it loops. It seems to work pretty much, except for one thing. If you can notice, at the beginning and at the end, it seems that it's becoming a little brighter. With it makes it pulsate. We can cancel that by simply going into our Fractal Nebula video here, and let's hit T for the opacity, and we're going to create a keyframe on the frame 0, and let's go to frame 45, which is the middle point of our animation, and here we can compare. So let's make another keyframe here by clicking here on the little diamond shaped thing, and here you can clearly see that this is a little bit darker than this is a little bit, well, brighter. What we can simply do is set this down to something like 70%, maybe lower than that, maybe 65. And then let's copy this keyframe here. So I'm going to select it, and let's hit Control C to copy it. And let's go right at the end, not at frame 89, but let's hit page down to go one frame further. Since our comp is 90 frame, this frame 90 is actually the frame 91, but it doesn't matter. We're going to paste that keyframe here, and it's the same value as the one we have at the beginning. So it should cancel a little bit of that pulsating effect that we had before very easily. Nice, nice, nice. So what else can we do now? We're not going to make this thing too complicated. Let's make another layer of this Fractal Nebula gaseous clouds from this one that we've made for. So this is the comp that was created by dragging both videos there. So let's make sure that we rename that to something that's more convenient. So let's call it Space Flight Compositing. So that's our final comp. And let's duplicate our first Fractal Nebula edit. So this is the one where we've got all our adjustment layers there, and where we were working our effects. So let's duplicate that comp. Let's select it, and let's hit Control D. So we've got the Fractal Nebula number 2. Let's double click on it. It's the same, of course. But what we can do is alter it, change it to something else, change it to something different, and put it on top of the other one. So maybe this one can be different kinds of clouds that are more in our face, and we can change the color of it. So let's do that. Let's work on this. First thing we're gonna do is delete all the keyframes that were generated by the exponential scale, and maybe we can even delete the second one. Start with the first one here, but we don't need to redo all these adjustments that we did. We can use the same kind of adjustment as the first one. We're going to create a variation. So this one, maybe we want it to be bigger than that. So let's start from scale 200. And also to make sure that it's not the exact same pattern as the other one, because, well, we want some variations in there. So let's go right in the evolution options, and we're going to change the random seed. So this here, this value here, if we drag this, it's going to change the pattern. It's going to still be based on the same kind of parameters. It's not going to look completely different, but it's going to use a different seed so we can get different types of clouds. Let's try to find something that's not too much. So I like this one prior. So we can use any number here, but let's try with 1230 here. So we're starting from 200 scale. Let's create a keyframe here, and let's go to the frame 90. So let's type 90 here, and we're gonna make it scale up to I don't know, 400. So they become real big like that, and maybe we can tone it down. So let's get to our toning down here, and maybe we can make this a little bit less intense, or right in our levels here we can cancel some of the, we just want some clouds. We don't want it necessarily to cover the entire area. And let's make it so it loops. So like we did prior to that, now we're going to duplicate that layer, and it's going to keep the same random seed number there. So let's duplicate it. One thing that I like to do, and I will show you right now, is perhaps we would want to change the random seed later on. So we want to make sure that both of these values here on both these layers always stays the same. So what we can do here, let's use this one as our base effect, and let's lock it down here so we keep this the parameters for this layer here, and let's select the second one on top and let's hit E. It's going to reveal the fractal noise effect here, and from there in the timeline, let's go down to the options. Let's go to the evolution options, and we're going to link the random seed of this layer with the random seed of this layer. So let's do that. Let's hold Alt and click on the stopwatch here, and right after that, let's pick up this little spiral here. It's a little pick whip, and we're gonna just point here at the random seed of this one. So it's gonna link them both. This number is gonna become red. We're not able to change this one anymore, but we can change this one, and it'll automatically change this one. So both of them are going to be connected. It's important that we do that if we want to be able to change it later on, and we want our loop to work correctly. So one thing that we forgot to do, and that we will do right away, is on the first one we forgot to select both of them and do the exponential scale. And this sounds like some self-advertisement there, I'm sorry. Let's do the same on the other one, but once again we have to make sure that it finishes at 400 here. It finishes at 200. So let's go to the first one, and let's make it 100. And let's go to the last one, and let's make it 200. I'm not certain if we actually need to put this one at 300, but let's try if it works. Select both. Go to Keyframe Assistant. Exponential scale, and right after we've done the exponential scale, let's select this layer and make sure that the opacity starts at 0, and let's make sure that it ramps up to 100. So we've created a keyframe here on frame 0. We've set it at 0, and let's go to frame 90, and let's just punch in 100% for the opacity. So it'll come up like this, and let's see, our frame 90 is that, and I'm hitting home to get back at the first frame here, and it looks the same. So if we close our work area and we play it back, this thing is gonna loop seamlessly. And once again, we got this pulsating effect, but we know that we can fix it right afterwards in post, like we did earlier. Now let's change the color, because red on red, there's no point. So we want to have a little bit more variations. Let's select our colorization layer. Now this one is stuck there because we've locked it down. So let's unlock it, and then we have access to the properties for this layer here, colorization. Let's get to the output cycle, and right now it's using a full red color. So let's double click on the little triangle here. And I really don't like this color picker, but this is the one we have. Let's make it some kind of a purple color. So let's get right there, and let's hit OK. So now we've got some purple clouds coming in, and now maybe they're too dark. We can play around with that graph here if for one reason or another we want to brighten them up, and we're pretty much done with that. Aside from, if you want, you can play around with the turbulence. We could change this effect, the turbulent displace here. This is the thing that makes it a little bit warped. We can also change the random seed there, but since we've got really different clouds now, it shouldn't make a big difference. So now what we've got to do is simply render that out. So when we work on our final compositing, it doesn't need to calculate everything from these effects, which are not too demanding for the computer's process, but still we're working in full HD. It's better to render these out. So we're going to add this composition to the render queue. Let's do that. Add to render queue. Now we've got our Fractal Nebula 2, lossless, that's okay for me. Select where we want it to be on our computer and let's render it out. Now I'm gonna do a time skip, and this time I promise you that I'll be back before tomorrow. All right, back from the time skip, and here it didn't take too much time, 1 minute, 8 seconds. Let's import the clip. So we've got our Fractal Nebula number 2. Let's bring it in. Let's go back to our spaceflight compositing where we've got both our video there waiting for us to just bring in this second type of nebula. Now we want to put this one to overlay, or let's try something like add maybe. This is going to blend both of these together, and we've got a more complex composition there with two types of different nebula clouds. So let's do the same as we did earlier for the pulsating effect. So let's just solo the purple clouds, and right there we can tone it down. So maybe this one doesn't need to be more than, let's bring it to 100 at frame 45, and let's get to the end, copy this. Let's see, now I'm at frame 0, and let's hit K to move to the next keyframe. It still feels a little bit too bright, so let's put 65, the same as earlier. Let's copy our keyframe and let's paste it right here. Control C, Control V, and there we've got our second layer of clouds. Let's get back our first layer of clouds. So this one, perhaps, I don't know, now we can decide, we can calibrate all that. So let's select our second layer, the red one, and maybe we can add some tint over it. Let's desaturate it. Maybe it's too much of a vivid color, so as we apply that, it's going to make it black and white. Let's reduce this to make it somewhat a more believable color, or else perhaps it's a little bit too vivid. And last but not least, what we can add on top of that, I mean, you can experiment and make yourselves your own space travel loop and add anything you want, but let's finish this with lens flare. So this is going to be a little bit touchy because I said that we're not going to use any plugins for this, but the thing is that the lens flare that comes bundled with After Effects is not really interesting. Let's add one by first adding a solid. So let's hit Control Y, and we've got our solid. Let's call it flare, and let's pick it up from our effect panel. So flare, here we've got a lens flare. This is the one that's the one we've got with After Effects. It's only 8-bit, so first thing, that's not really cool. Now this layer, we need to set this to add, and right there, it's not so bad, but I mean, everybody has seen this really uninteresting flare, so I wish I could have some better tool. I mean, you can change this to 105 millimeter prime. It's not even convenient to resize this thing, because once you do it, you resize the whole solid. So I really wish someone could help me out for that.
Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here for videocopilot.net, and today I'm very proud to present to you Optical Flare. It is a plugin I made while I was held captive by Michael Bay. This one's not free, but it sure saved a lot of time for a lot of people, so try it out, and we will see you next time.
Wow. Thank you, Andrew. I can't believe that with such a busy schedule that you have and all the energy you put in for the benefit of the whole community, I just can't believe you still have time to show up here on such an unknown channel. So yeah, I know I said no plugins, but at this point, there's no way I could skip this one, because this is a perfect example of a situation where using a plugin really makes a difference compared to what we have by default here in After Effects. So let me just quickly show you, but very quickly, you know, I'll let the master himself explain it to you in his own Optical Flare tutorial, but just as a mean of comparison, So let's do something together for a moment. Let's imagine that I didn't say we shall not use any plugin at the beginning of this tutorial, and let's see how easy and how convenient it would be if we were allowed to use Optical Flare. So let's try it out just for the sake of it. We already have a black solid set to add with the After Effects default lens flare. Let's remove this nefarious lens flare that I don't really like, and let's add our optical flare on there. And right away we've got something that's really interesting with nice effects there, very cool. And we can make it flicker, so we got this flicker section here. We can increase the speed and the amount, and then we can animate the evolution. So we have some like really cool animation there, so we can keyframe that, and really fun. And also it's got a super nice dashboard, so if we click on the options here, right here we've got a really nice interface here. We can choose from some presets, so of course we can build it all together, and I won't go through the whole process of that now because it's really, once again, really convenient to use what he's already made for us. Look at this, and you can play around with preview window here. Really convenient. So the one I like to use is the beam here. So let's try that. It's got a real nice streak here, and let's hit OK. So right away we've got our super cool and really sexy looking flare that we can play with. And let's see what one thing that we could do just like that for fun, just to have a little bit more detail in the way that our flare reacts with the environment. So we can have foreground layers, but since we're not in 3D right now, something that we can do very quickly is let's duplicate our second layer of Fractal Nebula here, and let's bring it up here, and let's set its mode back to normal, and let's also hit T to reveal the opacity setting, and we're gonna remove the keyframes on there and make it set it up to 100%, and let's pre-comp that. So we're gonna hit Control Shift C, or composition, where is that options? Layer, pre-compose. It's been a while since I'm always promoting the keyboard shortcuts because it's way faster. You know that already. So let's leave all the attributes in the spaceflight composition, and let's call this Fractal Nebula Matte. And there we've got a composition with our pre-rendered clip in it. We're gonna double click on it, and we're gonna alter it in some way. So let's add a tint effect on that, and we're gonna add this effect first because we want this to be grayscale, so without any colors, just black and white and different tones of gray. And after that we're gonna add the curve effect. So let's get our curve effect right on here, and what we're gonna try to do is we're gonna try to bring the bright spots, we're gonna try to make them even brighter than that. So let's something like that, not too much. And then we're gonna hit this button here to get back in the parent composition, so where we were editing our final compositing here. And the flare here, we're gonna set it to Luma inverted matte. So look at some details that we've got here. It's just like this flare was occurring behind this second layer of clouds that we have here. So that's a pretty interesting little trick that we can do. But let's go back to raw stuff, because I said no plugins, so that's the rule. So I know most of you must be tired of this, so you can stop watching, because right now what we're gonna do for the final section of this episode is we're gonna look at how to build our own flare effect. I might as well tell you as straightforward as I can. It's really never going to be as nice as this one that we have here from Optical Flare, but it can be perhaps a little bit better than the one that we've got by default. So let's try to do that. Now we don't have any flare, so let's build our own. We're going to create a new composition, so let's hit Control N, and maybe we can try to make it even bigger than that to make sure that it's big enough that we can rescale it, that we can have some control over it when we're done with it. So let's make a super big composition, 2160 by 2160, and it's going to be a square composition. So let's pick up this tool here, and we're going to create a star. So let's double click on the star. Now we get that. Depending on the last setting that you had here, maybe you might have a stroke on it, so you can just remove the stroke by clicking here. And for the fill color, let's make it white. Let's get in the content. So let's twirl down those little triangles here, and let's get into the polystar path. And right here we've got a few options. First option is the amount of points. So we want maybe a star with 4 points or something like that. And let's reduce the inner radius, get something a little bit tinier like that, some kind of a streak star, something like that. And maybe we can, not that, but maybe we can play a little bit with the roundness as well. So this is something that we can start with. And right on top of that, we can add a plain circle. So let's do that. Let's add an ellipse. And we're going to make it like double click like that. It's going to make it super big, but let's go inside of the settings of the path and let's reduce this much more than that. Let's make it small like this. And on this one, we're going to add some blur. So let's type blur, and maybe let's type fast blur. So we've got the fast box blur here is the new one. We still have access to the old effect After Effects used to have before, but now we have the fast box blur that we can use. It's a little bit faster to render. So let's increase the blur radius there. And then we have like some kind of a core for this. And then let's duplicate that. And this one we can make it a little bit bigger. So let's go right there inside the options. Let's make it a little bit bigger, this one, but this one let's blur it even more, and maybe we don't need to go that big. So yeah, that's something we can start with. After that, this comp we're creating now, let's name it. So I hit enter on the composition. We're going to call that Flare Core. Let's create another new composition. So we can click on this icon here, and let's make it, this dimension is okay. So as long as it's a square composition, let's call that a raise. So we're going to create some raise really fast. So let's create a new solid on that, Control Y. We can make it any color we want. That's not a problem. And on that, we're going to add once again our little fractal noise effect. So right in noise and grain, let's add the fractal noise there. And sorry, I'm going a little bit quicker now because I feel this is a little bit useless to do, because anyway you're gonna use Optical Flare because it's such a good plugin. But let's see. Let's stretch that to the max, and let's contract this until we have some kind of streaks like that. And then on top of that, we can add a linear wipe. So let's type linear wipe, add this effect right here. For the angle, let's put 0, and let's increase the transition completion to something about right here. And we can add some feather there. And this composition that we've baptized Erase, let's drag it onto the composition icon there to create a new composition with the raise composition in it. And raise, this one we're going to call it raise polar. So right here we've got our raise composition here pre-comped in there. We don't have any effects here because the effect resides right there inside it in our solid. So let's come back, and on top of that we're going to add the polar coordinates. So this is an effect that resides in the distort section, and let's bring it up right here. It's set to polar to rect. We're going to change that to rect to polar, and we're going to crank it up to 100%. So now we have some kind of rays streaking out from the center, and maybe we can click back here and make our fractal noise option accessible for us by locking this little icon there. And let's go back to the raise polar, and then we can play around with that depending on the kind of raise that we would want to achieve. So maybe more increased scale on the height for a nice raise there, and that's something that we can perhaps work with. It's not going to be the end of the world. I mean, let's unlock that, and let's go back to our flare core right here, and we can add our raise polar on top of that, set it to add, and decrease its opacity. So we've got something that we can play around with. Let's get back to our star here, and make sure that it's the best as we can. We can maybe scale this raise down, or rather get inside here and increase the feather amount, or change the transition setting. A little bit less contrast. It's a little bit too contrasty right now. And let's get back here. Let's get back here. So we've got some kind of raise there. Of course, we can animate those rays, and if we want to make that loop for 90 frames, you know the drill. We have the evolution option here. We're gonna check the cycle evolution option, which will allow us to make it loop. And let's just create a keyframe for the evolution on frame 0. Go to frame 90 and make it one full revolution. That'll make it shine like that. So we can go back to our spaceflight compositing, and let's bring in our flare core. Super huge because we made it bigger than our own comp. We can bring it down, put it somewhere like here, and we make it like really wide, this one. But of course, if you want to change the color, you can make it some different colors. And what else that we can do? Maybe have some kind of a halo. So let's, right inside here, let's add another circle, but this one, let's shut down the fill, and let's enable the stroke. And maybe we can use a gradient on that. So let's see, let's go right here in the content. Let's decrease this, whoops. Let's decrease the scale. And what are our gradient settings here? So this is some kind of a gradient I made before. You don't need to put exactly those colors, but let's just make sure that this gradient stretches out like this, so we can have our color here from the center point, and maybe a little bit smaller than that, and we can add some kind of a, once again, a fast blur on there, and not the CC radial, but the fast box blur. And then let's increase that, and maybe add some tint over there, just not to have it as bright. So this is going very quickly there, and let's set this flare core to add. And we've got a flare, and it's not that nice. So you see that's why it's important to have nice plugins sometime. And once again, if we want to have this streak there, we can quickly grab, let's shut down our stroke there. We can quickly grab our ellipse tool and make it a full color there. And let's draw some kind of an ellipse. Let's put it somewhat close to the center of our thing. And once again, we can add a fast blur on that, fast box blur. Make it only horizontal, increase that to go get some kind of a streak, set that to add, and tone down the opacity, so something like that. And it's, once again, it's a little too big, so let's maybe just link this new layer here with our flare core, and once again can decrease the scale. And the last thing that we can do, if you remember those nice little shapes that get away from the center, I don't know how to call them, but let's grab a polygon tool and let's add one by default. Maybe we can make this one some kind of a hotter color for the sun. And let's add a repeater, and perhaps let's make it smaller at first. So let's decrease the size for that. Let's add a repeater on that. Where's the repeater? There it is. And we've got some options here for this repeater. We can increase the amount of copies right in the transform properties for the repeater. We've got some default position here. We can change that and increase the scale as well, or decrease it, as well as the end opacity and the start opacity. And let's also make sure that this layer is set to add, and this whole layer, hit T, we can decrease the opacity for that. And let's bring that close to here. Go back inside the options. I should have planned this a little bit better, but you know, it's not really important because nobody actually creates their lens flare like that. It's really not a good, I don't recommend it. Just want to show you that it's a possibility, we can do it, but once again, this is an occasion where the plugins are really come in play and makes our life easier. So where's that repeater? Transform repeater, have some kind of rotation there, and we can kind of, and I say kind of, have some kind of control on that. It's not ideal. I get you. If we don't want to have pentagons, we can have circles, just increase the amount of points, and then we have some kind of circles. Let's put the end opacity lower than that, and yeah, it's not at all that obvious to make, but it is doable. The moral of the story is use optical flares when you want to create some flares, because it's really not interesting. But it's doable. Let's get rid of that and let's add back a solid back. Let's put our optical flares. Set that to add. Whoops. And grab this. Preset browser. Let's try this one. Oh, boom. This one is really like everything moves along with it. That's what's really interesting. So I'm sorry for wasting your time with that. Let's change the color. So I wanted this one, but instead of having it like this color, I want perhaps to make it blue. So right there, we've got some options to change that. And we can also change them individually. So right here, we still have some of those layers. You see each one is a different part of the flare. This one is still this color, so might want to just pick up some different shade here and hit OK. And maybe that's not the kind of blue that I want. Maybe a more this kind of blue. Bring it up there. Keyframe the animation evolution. Let's go to the last frame. Make it the 1 revolution. And add some flicker. Maybe not that fast. Maybe a little bit slower. Maybe not that intense. So let's reduce the amount. Let's randomize the seed. I didn't like that seed. The next one should be better. All right. Oh yeah, let's make sure that we put back our matte layer and set it to Luma inverted matte to make sure that we have some of the smoke that goes in front of our flares here for a nicer effect. Oh, sorry, I got a call. Gotta take this. Who could that be? Yeah, hello?
Yeah, hello.
Oh, hey, it's Neil deGrasse Tyson. How are you doing, man? What a coincidence. I was just recording a space flight tutorial and I was about to...
What are you doing?
Well, if you would just let me talk, I was just about to tell you that I'm in the process of recording a tutorial.
I know! But what in the name of the Lord are you doing here?
Yeah, I know. You know, I tried to make a flare manually with shape layers and I completely messed up. So you're calling me to tell me it looks like crap. Is that what's up, Neil? You're right, man. You know, you're right. I shouldn't have done that.
No!
You know, Neil, it's not that easy to create a flare without using Optical Flare or the other one, Null Light Factory. And I wasn't prepared and I went too fast. But I'm sure that the people watching, if they take their time, they could make a better one. And at least they have some kind of instruction they can follow if they really want to do it.
Do you know what exactly causes a lens flare to occur?
Oh, yeah, and I think I know where you're going with this. Please don't.
In order to get a flare, you must have a light source, like the sun. And then, only then, this light from the sun or some other kind of light source get scattered in a lens system of a camera.
Yeah, I get your point, Neil, but to be fair, I wasn't trying at all to make it scientifically accurate.
The problem is, right in this shot you're working here, I don't see a sun big enough or close enough to produce that kind of flare. In fact, I see lots of suns, because, you know, stars are suns, but here they're so small that there is no way in 13.7 billion years you would get a flare like that.
Oh, I would be the last one to argue with you on that. But, you know, my intention was just to make something nice and easy to create for all of those out there who don't have the chance to own any plugins.
Do you have the slightest idea of how big of a sun you would need to get a constant flare like that? Because you seem to be going faster than the speed of light here, which by itself is a complete nonsense.
I don't know, but tell you what, let's say it's not a flare, let's say it's a huge hypergiant star that I just invented, and it's like 10,000 times bigger than VY Canis Majoris, and it's way far back, so its scale is not affected by the parallax. Does that make you happy, Neil? Are you alright with that?
And what are those red and purple clouds there? Space alien farts?
Oh, that's enough, Neil. I've had it with him. As for you, if you ever went this far in the video, let me say that I love you, and if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing. If you want to support me, I just opened up a Patreon, so the link is in the description down below. So if you think of yourself as a modern Gaius Maecenas, you know what to do. And as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.